Hey, happy New Year's Day. Dr. Shawn Nabors here, licensed mental health therapist, West Michigan anxiety specialist, and owner of the Anxiety Treatment Center of West Michigan. Hey, today I would like to talk to you about leaning into your anxiety in the new year. Now, why would you want to lean into anxiety? Well, as a specialist, the one thing I see with all my new clients is avoidance of anxious triggers. Anything that makes them anxious, they avoid it, and over time, they start to develop a problem with experiencing anxiety. So that's why it's really important to lean into your anxiety. If you don't, you're going to have a hard time experiencing it in the future. So I want to give you 3 tips for the new year for leaning into your anxiety. Tip number 1, you want to start thinking about your anxiety differently. When we think of anxiety, we think of negative things, right? Well, our bodies aren't stupid, they're not disordered inherently. We have anxiety for a reason, and typically that is to make us aware that uncertainty is present that we've not usually experienced before, and that uncertainty may be dangerous or it may not be. It's just an alarm signal that you're experiencing an unfamiliar situation that could possibly be dangerous, so be cautious. We want to start thinking of anxiety as a necessary discomfort, right? It's necessary for us to stay alive, and it does so by making us uncomfortable, and it may give us false alarms at times. So move it from something negative to something more neutral, like a smoke detector. That's a good analogy for anxiety. Next, we want to not run from anxious thoughts. The brain gives us anxious thoughts in the form of what I like to call scary assumptions. The more you run from these thoughts, the more you're going to have problems with those thoughts. The thing you want to do with anxious thoughts is you just want to sit with them. Don't try and challenge them. Don't try and think positively about them. Just sit with them and purposely think about them. What our brain does very well is it desensitizes to things, and it habituates to things. That means that whatever is bothering us or whatever we experience over time no longer is that much of a trigger, and we're used to experiencing that trigger the more we encounter it. So if you eat your favorite food every day for 30 days straight, you're going to get sick of that food. Think of it the same way with desensitizing to thoughts. The more you allow yourself just to think about a thought, over time, your brain's going to get tired of that thought, and it's not really going to become as triggering as it used to be. So, tip number 2, don't run from anxious thoughts, sit with them. The more you sit with them and think about them, the less they'll bother you over time. It's a form of exposure to thoughts. Finally, we want to use a technique that I love. It's called the opposite action technique. It's a behavioral technique. This technique is anytime that you're feeling uncomfortable anxiety, think about what your anxiety wants you to do in that moment. Whatever your anxiety wants you to do, you should do the complete opposite of that. Obviously, take into account your safety and things like that. But for novel situations where there's really no chance of danger, whatever your anxiety wants you to do, you should commit to doing the opposite of that. And if you can't do the opposite of that, what would be 50% of the opposite? So, for example, if I am in a group of people and I have social anxiety, if my anxiety does not want me to talk, the opposite of that would be to start talking. If I'm not ready to start, doing the opposite right away, then I can do 50% of the opposite. And so what would that look like? So the opposite of what my anxiety wants me to do is to talk a lot. 50% of the opposite is to talk strategically and periodically here and there in spurts. The thing that you should not do is exactly what your anxiety wants you to do. And that's not leaning into it, and it's causing you to have a problem with anxiety over time. So, those are the 3 tips. Think about your anxiety differently. Try and think about it in a more general, neutral way, a necessary good that causes discomfort. Don't run from anxious thoughts. Try and neutralize those thoughts by letting yourself think about them more. And finally, use the opposite action technique. It's a great behavioral psychology technique to help you to have less problems with anxiety over time. Hey, as always, thanks for stopping by and take care.